And we're live. Hello,
And we are,
everyone.
huh?
Hello, everyone. This is Abdullah Samir, and I am joined by special guest Ali Rizvi. Now, Ali is like original. He's like OG, like original gangster. He's been around since like the dinosaurs. Like I'm not saying anything about your age. I'm just saying you've been around for like a long time.
Dinosaurs didn't exist. It
Oh
was
yeah.
Adam and Eve. The earth and heavens were separated, remember? It wasn't there's no such
Yeah.
thing as dinosaurs.
Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So Ali's been around for a very long time. I'm assuming most people that are going to be joining will know Ali, but let's assume that you don't actually know him, and let's actually talk about this. Let's talk about so you're a Shia ex-Muslim.
Yeah.
Now, when you left Islam, that there was no term ex-Muslim, was there?
No, not really. So I when did I leave? I had realized I'd become sort of an agnostic / atheist in my early 20s. Or even before that. I was always sort of doubtful. I went through phases, but there was nobody. There was no ex-Muslim community. There was nothing. We just knew about Salman Rushdie, who was sort of somewhere. Nobody really, never really surfaced that much. And yeah, there wasn't really a whole lot going on. So I used to just basically just annoy my relatives and friends and everything. And then I realized that it was affecting me, annoying everybody and destroying all my relationships. So I decided to just start blogging about it. And this was maybe around 11, 12 years ago.
So you were like talking to people about it and they were getting annoyed, you mean? Like you were like, hey mom, hey dad, hey uncle, hey auntie, like I'm not sure about these things in Islam, like kind of like that?
Yeah, sort of. So what happened was that I would get, whenever there were situations where, like when you grow up in a Muslim family, even if it's a liberal or progressive Muslim family, the religion, you come face to face with it very often, right? So it just sort of interferes. Everyone's like, oh no, don't do this because this is haram. Don't do this. So whenever things like that would happen, I would pipe up. Yeah. And there were certain times when it was emotionally heavy. Like for instance, in around 2001, my father died, right, of cancer.
Oh.
So this was about 17, 18 years ago almost. And I remember that after he died, there was in the ICU after, right after he died, I was there with his body. And then the orderly came in and he said, do you want us to shave him? My dad was very specific about he used to shave every single day. So I was like, yeah, he used to like doing that. He had some stubble. So we shaved him. And then my uncle came in. He's like, no, this is haram. Why did you shave him? Oh. This is, after someone dies, you should not shave them. And there were all of these things about how you're not supposed to alter the body once they've died. And then those kinds of things, that's when I would speak up, because I would think, I'm like, my father just died like 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
And really, like, this is what you want to make a big deal about. So even at times like that, the religion thing would come in really strongly. Like, who's being buried, they wouldn't allow my mother and my sister to go to the burial. So things like that, when it really, really, when you're going through any kind of process, and then this sort of religious mythology starts coming in and intruding on it, right? It feels very, very invasive. So those are the times when I would really become animated, and I would be confrontational. Otherwise, most of the time, I was able to coexist with my family in general, because for the most part they weren't super, super religious, right?
But isn't like someone dying one of the very things where religion is giving people structure, and so how do you reconcile that? Like, without religion, what would people do, like, first when someone dies? How would they cope with that? How do you think we should cope with that?
Well, people have coped with it. There are many people in, for instance, there's entire countries where the majority of the populations are non-religious, like the Scandinavian countries, like, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, all of these places where people cope with it. People die and people cope with it. And now that, I've been an atheist for, I don't know, decades now, so I know that it's something that you can cope with. I actually wrote an article about this called Grief Beyond Belief: How Atheists Deal with Death.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so there was a friend of mine who was actually, from high school, whose father had died, I think maybe a few years ago, and she had written to me and she had said, so tell me something, what is it? What am I supposed to do now as an atheist? So I wrote her like a long letter, and then I published it in HuffPost. And that was either, there were so many things that I thought of. I remember my uncle once said to me, he's like, your father, he's still alive. He's alive through you.
Mm.
And I thought that's actually quite literally true.
Yeah.
Because 50% of my genetics is from my father. I mean, and there was something strangely comforting. It was more comforting to me knowing that than it was to think that, okay, we're going to meet in the heavens sometime and there's going to be all these virgins around us and he's going to have his 72, I'm going to have my 70. I mean, that stuff disturbs me.
Yeah.
But just this idea, there's so many things that you think of. I mean, there's comfort you get in that. It's obviously a difficult thing. You can't completely, it's not going to be easy. Even religious people who believe that they're going to meet their loved ones in heaven or whatever it is, I mean, they also mourn. They're also dramatically affected by the death of loved ones. They suffer through it the same way that, for instance, I did when I lost my parent. I didn't see much of a difference. So I think that, people cope with it in different ways. It's something people have been doing since the beginning of time.
Mm-hmm.
Death has been around for much longer than religion has.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd say in some cases, like maybe this is not as common, but it can actually cause pain. Like religion can make someone's death even worse. Like, for example, if that person was like considered like a sinner, or for example, in my case, like I considered my dad to be from like the wrong sect, right? He was a Miley and I was Sunni, so because I converted to Sunni. And I used to cry, like I even cried once, like talking to him and saying that you're going to hell if you continue to do, to pray to Aga Khan, because this is like shirk, this is unforgivable, right? And and I like, so in my case, I actually considered it like it was actually causing more harm. Like it wasn't actually bringing any sort of comfort to me that when he died, I'm like, I don't even know if he's going to heaven. Like I don't think he's going to heaven because of his like, twisted beliefs that I used to have. So he was in the law, and even I could use the example of my wife. Like her family, they're all Christian, like background. None of them are Muslim. So theoretically, they're all going to hell too, right? As a Muslim. So you have a lot of converts to Islam and there's a lot of converts, right? And they most of them, their family members are all going to hell, right?
Yeah. That's so. There's many. I mean, so that was a little, again, like my family was a little bit more moderate, progressive. We were taught that, and don't worry, Allah judges everybody on their own, and they're not. If they're a good person, they're going to go to heaven, and all this stuff. And I used to think, I'm like, oh, why do I have to be Muslim then? That was one thing. So, but you're right. I mean, it is a terrible thing to think that someone that you love and care about, who you knew as a good person, is going to burn in hellfire for eternity just because they believed in the wrong thing. I mean, that's a torturous thing for somebody to go through who has lost a loved one, especially like a parent or a spouse. But I just found it. I always tell people, I mean, like 13.8 billion years before I existed. I came to the world in 1975, and before that, all these amazing things happened. You mentioned the dinosaurs. There was I was going to say Noah's flood, but that's not true. But there was there's a Kennedy assassination. There was the election of, or there was the man landed on the moon. All of these things, and I wasn't there. I didn't miss it. I didn't even know it happened. I wasn't even aware that there was of anything. There was nothingness for 13.8 billion years, and I didn't suffer.
Yeah,
I don't even know that it happened.
Yeah,
and for me, the idea that after I die, I'm just going to go right back to that.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me. I mean, it didn't bother me for 13.8 billion years. Why would it bother me for after that? So, but that's my own personal feeling. I think that if you talk to different atheists, they will all tell you different ways that they have learned to cope with things like death. But The one thing it hasn't done is a lot of it doesn't necessarily take them back to the mythology and the superstition. But all that said, I do have to say that I think that we have to do a better job. People in the atheist, secular, free-thinking community to provide, some sort of to actually take these subjects head on. The subjects that religion has had such a big monopoly over, the comfort and the comfort in times of death. We need to do a better job of that, because often we just say, this is true, this is not, there's evidence for this, there's no evidence for this. In my book, as you may have read, in my aunt, my mother's sister, she lost a daughter when her daughter was 3 years old. She died of cancer. She died of leukemia. And then after her daughter died, a year later, they had another daughter. And then when she was 3 years old, she also got leukemia and she also died. So they went through it twice. Now, I could go up to her, and she became very religious after that, right? I had the opposite effect. That was actually one of the things that made me a skeptic, going through that, seeing my cousins go through it. And I could go up to her and I could say that, well, no, you just have to suck it up. You have to accept the truth. There's nothing out there. And I could present her with all of the Bertrand Russell and arguments about, existence and life and whether there's life after death or not. And it would almost be cruel, So I have to, what do you say to people like that? That's something that what we do, all of the work that we do, that's something that we should be talking about more. And I think that we should probably start talking about more and discussing these things. And that's one of the reasons I wrote that article.
So the interesting thing was was going to ask you about that story, because I've read about probably half or more than half of your book. And I found that really interesting that this is an example. Now, it's a little bit of a different angle, but the fact that both of them died, or at least one of them died, from a cancer that's now curable.
Yes.
So this is an example where you mentioned where, all the prayers in the world, the combined prayers of the entire family, extended family, making dua for these little girls that, committed no crime. Even in Islam, they're considered innocent. And, the heart-wrenching, torture that the parents had to go through, not just the parents, but the whole family, it all seemed for nothing, right? It's like one of those, a deer burns to death in a forest kind of examples where you can't see there's nothing positive whatsoever coming out of this. You can try to twist it however you like and say it made me appreciate life more or something, but even people that go through these things, nobody would say I'd go through that again. Nobody wants to.
No, not at all.
Yeah, and the fact that science, which is when we say science, it's not a holy power. We're talking about humans, us humans taking care of ourselves. We found ways to handle these situations in ways that religion wasn't it's not handling it. Duas didn't work. They just don't work, right? And kind of a false hope in people.
So what it is it is false hope. The thing is that a lot of times people do these things because there's no alternative, right? If people didn't understand what was going on, I feel like religion, one of the reasons it started because someone who everybody really loved died, and they were burying them underground, and they just had to figure out there was a defense mechanism that how do I cope with this? And there was this idea that, okay, no, there has to be something else out there.
Yeah.
And they didn't understand the sun, so they started worshiping the sun. They didn't understand cows, they started worshiping cows. Whatever they didn't understand, they could. And then with time, we understood what the sun was.
Yeah.
We understood the stars and the moon. We understood the water cycle and the carbon cycle. And then we started going into more and more sort of abstract, unseen, monotheistic, So it's just a matter of, and right now there are still a lot of things we don't understand about death, but there are more things that we do understand as well. And I just think that when it comes to this is just something that if you want to provide comfort, you can look at the rational side of things. You can understand what is true and what is right. You can discuss that, but you also have to simultaneously acknowledge that many human beings, or most human beings, have an irrational side to them as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's an emotional and irrational side to them. that needs these answers, and with time those answers get more and more sophisticated, they get more and more melded with science, but we still have some ways to go. But going back to the cancer, just really quickly, the leukemia is the point I made in the book as well, was that, you know, in 1980 when this happened, this disease killed lots of kids.
Yeah.
Before 1980, for millennia upon millennia, all of the children who had this disease, acute lymphoblastic leukemia or childhood blood cancer, they all died. Now, since then, or just over the last few decades, this disease now has a cure rate above 90%.
Wow.
More than 90% of kids are not just treated with this for the rest of their life, but they're cured permanently. So once they go through the treatment, they can live the same life that you and I do, as if they never had cancer. Now, God was around, supposedly, for all of those millennia. Nothing happened. But what changed in the last few decades was the advancement of medical science and the efforts and the work of human scientists and physicians. And that's what changed. That's what changed these sort of millions of lives of little children that for millennia were being killed. So whenever we say, "Oh, thank God that we have this cure," no, you know, thank God for all of those deaths that happened before.
Yeah.
Like, thank medical science and physicians who helped us bring the cure.
Yeah, and
Right.
but isn't cancer because of vaccines and because of, you know, the Monsanto and because of GMOs? I mean, we eat so much GMOs nowadays. So shouldn't cancer rates actually be going up? Like, why would
This
you
is
be
the
going
problem. When people talk about the rights, the political right being the anti-science party, I always like to point out this whole vaccine conspiracy and the Monsanto and the GMO and all of those myths. Even like organic food.
Yeah.
I think things like that, all of these, there's so much misinformation when it comes to science on the left as well.
Yeah.
So, but and this just goes to this idea of the irrationality. You know, people are irrational. People tend to magnify anecdotal things. So if you have one kid who's got autism because, you know, you had vaccines, everyone's going to look at that like, okay, I'm never going to vaccinate my kid again.
Yeah.
But if
that one is almost like what you could say, that one is like a true lie that was spread by Dr. Wakefield. Like he was getting
published.
he was getting money to sue the vaccine companies, and he didn't disclose that. He was testing on children without proper ethical approval. And of course, the whole thing was there's been like hundreds of studies after that not a single one of them has shown a connection between autism and vaccines, right? I wonder, like, it's a little bit off topic, but what is it about vaccines that causes so much fear and dread? Like are people against, like, people are not against antibiotics like that. Like, nobody's like, I'm not going to take antibiotics for my TB. I'm just going to let my body rot to death. But with vaccines, it's like this weird, like, is it because it's a needle? Is it because there's oil vaccines too, like drops for polio, right?
Yeah. So there are one of the big differences between something like antibiotics and vaccines is vaccines are preventative, right? So the person that you're giving the vaccine to doesn't have any visible disease. They're perfectly healthy. They're running around, little kids. And now you're like, I'm going to stick a needle in this kid and I'm going to inject them with this. It's still a virus, but it's an inactivated virus. I mean, these are not things that ordinary people understand and can comprehend and want to take. Do you have kids? I have a kid. I mean, we don't. It's the last thing that you want to take risks with. Yeah. So again, there's the irrational side of people that, I try to understand why they don't want to do it. The question is how to counter it. Antibiotics, obviously, your kid is really, really sick. You give them antibiotics, they get better. So it's a much more visible response to it. So this, and it's been a long time. We've had vaccines for a very, very long time. People don't remember smallpox. It was eradicated a long time. There's generations of people that don't even know what it was. People don't remember what measles looked like, what polio looked like. People don't remember any of these things. So now they're like, why are we trying to stick needles in our kids to prevent these things I've never even seen? And that's one of the bigger obstacles. So
I was gonna say that, like, people don't even remember, like, when I'm one of those people too, because I was never, like, I was not alive at the time when these things happened. I just want to quickly share my screen here. Like this, this is what people had to go through who had polio.
Yep.
Like, but because of the success of the whole vaccine thing, like, we don't even know this. We don't even see this.
We don't see it. Yeah, it's yeah, go ahead.
No, and that's just my point. Like, anti-vaxxers are a product of the success of vaccines.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's what the problem is. And so, and this actually goes very well into what everything else that we're discussing. About religion and skepticism and people who believe in religion and why they do believe in religion, and why fewer, as the more sort of sophisticated or civilized or developed a society becomes, the less need there is for religion. A lot of it has to do with security. It's a privilege to not worry about these things because you don't have to deal with them.
That's because people get arrogant when they have money and they're like, I don't need you, Allah. I'm God. I don't need you to take care of me anymore.
No, it's because more than that. I think it's that there is a sense of security. Look, the world is very, very unjust. Okay, like I remember Bertrand Russell had this this analogy that he made about a crate of oranges. He said that it's we try to think like we open up a crate of oranges and supposing the top layer is rotten. What are you going to think? You're going to think, okay, that means a whole crate must be rotten, right? So I'm going to get rid of this. But the way that we think about religion is, if the top layer is rotten, that means that there must be some fresh oranges underneath. Like that's the way that people try to think of things. There's so much injustice. There are people who are born in poverty and famine. Their kids are born in poverty and famine. They see them suffer. They see them grow up, and they are going to be subject to all these injustices and cruelty, and they're going to die that way, and it's just not going to be fair. Whereas, someone like MBS in Saudi Arabia is going to be born into wealth, like obscene wealth. He's going to live a life buying yachts, living, the life. And then he's probably going to die surrounded by his loved ones, and it'll be fine. He'll get away with all of it, and that's not fair. So what do you do? How do you reconcile that? There's got to be some justice. That's the way that people want to think. Now, a long time ago, when people had issues like anxiety or depression or any kind of existential crisis, what do we do today? We go to the doctor, we get Xanax. We have Xanax, we have Valium, we've got antidepressants, all of these different drugs that we take, and that they make us better. We have psychotherapy, and all these things are. But what was a substitute for that back then, before Xanax and before Freud and before all of these antidepressants? The substitute was prayer. You would go. That's the thing that would give you comfort, that would relieve your anxiety. And people suffered the same kind of anxiety, the same intensity that they do now back then. It's just at that point, they didn't have the solutions we do. So when we have these solutions and we have this privilege, it's very, very easy to look on people who have been downtrodden and think, why can't these people just think rationally? And the thing is, they can't. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. It's a difficult thing to convince them to do, unless you acknowledge and sympathize with their experience as well. Right? And that's one thing that I tried to do in my book too. I tried to explain that.
So I was going to say, okay, so there's two different points I want to make here. One is like prayer. So there was a study done, the Harvard prayer study, where they tried to gauge the effectiveness of prayer. I mean, we humans, the only method we have to test something, I mean, let's not say the only method, but one of the most reliable methods is something that we came up to called the scientific method. So scientific method is the gold standard because it tries to remove as much ambiguity, as much like false reporting and, like false conclusions that you make by having like, you have a placebo and you have a control group and all that stuff. So this was one attempt where like a Christian group actually funded a study done by proper scientists in a controlled situation, laboratory situation, where they tried to gauge the effectiveness of prayer. So they had two groups of people. I'm sure you're aware of this. One group, like it all had to do with like, I think they were like leg accidents or something, and they were healing. They had broken bones or something. So they wanted to see whether the people that were prayed for anonymously so there was one group that they actually told them they prayed for them. There was another group where they prayed for them, but they didn't tell them. And there was a third group that was just like control. There was nothing happened. It was just normal. And what they ended up finding was, surprisingly, the group that they told them, people are praying for you, it's almost like it caused anxiety in them. It took them even longer to heal on average.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, I'm making dua for you, and you're like, oh my God, I better get better. I don't know if that's what happened exactly, but it's kind of a strange, like it's a very strange conclusion, right? And when I was Muslim, I used to sincerely believe that dua worked. Not every single time, but it worked on average, let's say, right? And so actually the funniest thing, I actually read like a scientific paper written by one of these scientists that showed that prayer worked, but it was a joke. And I didn't realize it. I thought it was real. So when I shared it with one of my atheist friends, I'm like, look, there's a study. It shows right here that prayer actually, it was the opposite of the Harvard study, but it was actually a joke, right? And he's like, this is a joke, right? The guy was kidding. Like, it's not a real paper. I was like, what? And to me, that was like that was a little jab into my worldview, because, and then I started to really wonder, like little by little, I started to think, like, what about people that say the adhkar when they go in the car before, subhanalladhi sakhalana hada, before they go in the car, for it's supposed to protect you as well, but don't those people also get accidents too at the same rate as the ones that don't say it? And we were taught that this protects you,
Right?
And so these things started to kind of not. There was some cognitive dissonance now, and I didn't know how to resolve it. But let's say, like, prayer aside, what about reading Quran? Do you think reading Quran takes away people's depression?
I think at one point, so I'll tell you, I think it can. Here's why. I don't think it's specific that it's to the Quran necessarily, but if you've been taught something, right, and you've been told, for instance, that I'll tell you, when I was a kid and I had nightmares, then my mom used to say in Urdu, she used to say, "Charo kul paro," the four surahs that start with kul.
Mm-hmm.
This kul a'udhu birabbin nas and kul huwallahu ahad and
Yeah.
kul a'udhu birabbil falaq and all those. She's like, there's four of them, and she's like, just read those four and recite them. So whenever I'd have a nightmare, I'd wake up and then I would just start reading those, and I'd peacefully fall back asleep. Now, if I was in a Hindu family, she would have told me some other thing, to read. If I was in a Jewish family, I would have been reading something from, the Torah, whatever it is. But it had a calming effect. So it has a calming effect. So I would think, anecdotally, I'm like, look, I'm from a Jewish family, and I read these verses from the Hebrew Bible, and now I don't feel scared anymore, and it really, really helps me. And it's not true. It's just a matter of, I could tell you some secular stuff to say, Bertrand Russell quotes, and then you could, if I trained you the right way, you could figure it out. So yeah, reading the Quran works, I think, the same way. Is when people read it, there is a meditative aspect to prayer, right? There is there's this idea that, supposing when you're doing namaz or salah, right, then when you're praying, you have to put everything out of your mind except for, you just focus on God and focus on what you're saying, and that can be anxiety reducing, right? It's a form of it is a kind of a form of meditation in a way, where you're just kind of focused on one thing and you're not looking anywhere else. You're not thinking about anything else. At least you're trying not to, and you can pray, and that can have anxiety reducing effects. You can just daydream, you can just think about things, and it will have an anxiety reducing effect. So there is I do think that these things work, and they're confounding factors, and that is what people used to do before. I mean, the reason these things exist is because they said, and that's also one of the reasons why they come out in the form of some sort of art. So listening to music, watching, looking at paintings, looking at really nice art, or reading poetry. These are things that have a calming effect. That's something that makes people relax. It makes people feel good. It makes people feel connected, and it's a very personally enriching experience. And if you look at all of these religions, I mean, if you look at Christianity, you go to the Vatican, there's artwork, like some of the best artwork in the world that you're going to see there. Sculpture and on all of that every church has. They'll have gospel choirs, they have hymns. In Islam, you have the adhan itself is a musical thing. The Quran is full of poetry. Artistically, there's calligraphy. Calligraphy is a form of art, and these are all. So they use, art, and they use these things that actually emotionally and sentimentally pack a punch, and they really connect with people. When I'm Shia, I had come from a Shia background, so when we had the majalis, and we would remember that everything that the Imam Hussein apparently went through, right? So we had it was done through in a very dramatic way. There was there were these things called Noha and Marcia, full of poetry and music in a way that you would listen to, and that would, when you pack a message into an artistic form, then the message really, really resonates. And yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say thank you to Alina for the donation. It's very kind of you.
Oh, thank you, Alina.
I want to say something. For me, okay, I feel like you're definitely right, and it's definitely psychological in a big way. So when I had a post on Facebook that really pissed off some of my Muslim friends, and I didn't realize they'd be offended by it, but whatever. I said when I used to lose my keys, I used to say Bismillah, and now I just say Yabba Dabba Doo, and it works just as well. and the reality is it does, because when you say it, you find it, and you're like, it happened because I said it. But you would have found it anyways, right?
There's a great sorry, finish your point.
Yeah, so what I was gonna say was, I find that like there's a big problem in the Muslim community, which is the problem of, how do I say this, mixing up like depression with like religious kind of like solution. So for example, like a lot of people don't realize that like depression is a real disease. Yes. And you have to treat it like a real disease. You can't just make dua and it's gonna go away, right? Like there's real things you can do. Like there's medication you can take, there's counseling you can get. People need help to get out of this trap that their mind creates.
And it's also, it's not only that, it acts as a real disease. I think this is a very important point. That's why I want to mention this. That first of all, there is a definite hereditary component to depression, right? So it is, I mean, you see this with the Hemingway family. I mean, Ernest Hemingway committed suicide. One of his depression ran in his family. It runs in families. The second thing is that it is a fatal disease. 15%, that's not a small number, 15% of people with depression who are untreated will kill themselves. They will commit suicide.
Wow.
Okay. So so it's actually a much more serious disease than many of the physical elements.
Yeah, true. Somebody said you look like, please tell Ali this, he looks like Yasir Qadi.
Yasir Qadi?
Compliment on that, but yeah, I guess.
Hey, that's gonna give me some Islamic street cred. That's good.
so I'm
a sheep in wolf's clothing. That's good. I
actually had this problem that I used to find among Muslims, that many Muslims believed that if you don't pray enough, like the solution to depression and sadness and anxiety and all of this is pray more, be more religious, right? And that's a big problem, because one of the conclusions I came to as a Muslim while I was a Muslim is that like happiness and sadness is something external to religion and religious belief and religious practice. Because as a Muslim, there were times where I was depressed, not clinically depressed, but I had my tough times. And even if I prayed, it doesn't help, right? And it's like, it was at that time where I read a book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, and I found it like amazing. Like it made me realize that this like search for meaning is something that goes for all of humanity, whether you follow religion, whether you believe in God or don't believe in God. It's something that all of us have to find for ourselves.
Yeah, they do. And I think that's also, along with, there are, I think, 2 or 3 buckets or territories where the skeptic community and the free thinking community, I feel, has to take on more and be more and be more compassionate about and addressing. And one is, we already talked about death, how to deal with death. The other is talking about morality. Where does morality come from? I know what the real story is. We all know what the real story is, but a lot of people don't understand. There's still this very, very pervasive myth among the masses that without religion, that people cannot have morality. Right. So that's and more when more ex-Muslims come out, like yourself, for instance, I think that shows people that morality isn't exclusively the realm of religion. And I think this is a third thing. It's the idea of meaning. How do you provide meaning? If there's nothing out there, there's just nothing. Why aren't we all just nihilistic? Why do we do anything? What does anything even matter? Right? Where does meaning come from? That's a very, very important thing. And meaning, interestingly, is an evolutionary byproduct. Like, our quest for meaning is an evolutionary byproduct of developing long-term memory. So evolutionarily, what happened is a lot of animals and lower sort of life forms tend to have just short-term memory and stuff that they can access immediately. And the long-term memory stuff is very sort of, it's very deeply embedded, like how to walk, how to communicate, things that you learn over life. But with us, we have long-term memory in the sense that we can make long-term plans, we can make long-term goals, right? So we evolved the ability to do that because of heightened intelligence.
Yeah.
And when you do that, then when you have the ability to have long-term memory, you can make long-term goals, which means that this idea of purpose, this idea of meaning just naturally emerges as a consequence of that.
Yeah.
And without it, we feel lost and we don't understand, what to do.
Yeah.
So, this is also, I think, that why people are really starved for this. And you see phenomena like, like the Jordan Peterson phenomenon. Lots and lots of people are going, and a lot of people who are atheists are totally flocking to it, because the one thing that the atheist movement did not give them is this, well, what is the meaning of life? What is my purpose in life? Where am I going? Where did I come from? And all of that, the sense of identity and group belonging. This is something people have exploited time and time again throughout history. The sense of ISIS has exploited it, by giving people a sense of identity, belonging, and meaning and purpose in life. Hitler exploited it. People like Donald Trump exploited it. And it's not just it's sort of the evil people. Bernie Sanders has done the same thing in his political rallies. Someone like Jordan Peterson also provides that. So this is something that's a huge vacuum that it's also something that we have to address. And when people say that atheists and secularists, they should not organize, they should not engage in activism, otherwise they become just like religion. This is my number one argument against it. This is why I think that there should be a community, there should be some sense of organization, and why I support things like Sunday assemblies for secularists as well.
Oh yeah. Just want to say thank you again. Got another donation by Snakehog. He said you made a great point earlier about how people who have endured hardship for generations in less developed countries more inclined to believe in the irrational. And the other thing I found quite interesting is how the less control. Now, this is really interesting. I can't remember who said this. I think it was a TED talk I watched. That was about patterns. What was it by? Anyways, I'll look it up later. But basically, what he said was, what we find is that in situations where we are less in control of a situation, we tend to be more superstitious. So he gives the example of like baseball, where the the pitcher, it's notoriously difficult to be a pitcher. And so there's so many things out of your control. So what you find is that pitchers tend to be like more superstitious than batters. Like they'll spit, or they'll have a lucky charm, or they'll rub it, or they'll do all of these things to try to bring control back into their lives, because there's a lot of there's a lack of control there, right? So in the same way in our lives, I think the less control that we have in a situation within a war-torn country, we're suffering through some disease or whatever, in many cases, we are trying to wrestle that control back into our hands, and to get God on our side and say, okay, God, help me through this and change the situation. And we want to feel like what we did is we actually changed the outcome. right?
Yeah.
Based on what we're doing. I think that was quite a fascinating point as well.
No, I actually I love that baseball analogy. I think that's true because they do always have these rituals over there. They're like spitting or doing whatever. They do. You always wonder, I'm like, what's wrong with this guy? He's got some shades, but that's what they do. And yeah, and control is tied with security, right? A lot of this is just about if you don't have financial security, if you don't have security, physical security of, are you going to be okay? Are your kids going to be okay? Is someone going to run in and kill them because you believe in the wrong God, or is someone going to, do you know where you're going to get your next meal from? These are the kinds of things that make people desperate. And when you're desperate, the desperation comes from a lack of security and lack of control, that helplessness, right? That comes from it. And it's a very natural thing to want to have some sort of superstitious belief, and people do tend to be superstitious. And religion is just, especially religious belief, is just it's like superstition on steroids. I mean, that's really all it is, right? It's a sense of security that gives you everything that you need in these times. So, and the only point is, and you were saying about the praying. You said that yabba dabba do works just as well. It reminded me of a Gorge Carlin routine where he talked about praying, and he said that he decided to pray to Joe Pesci, and Joe Pesci, the actor who was in Goodfellas, and yeah, he's like, I just decided to do that because like the guy, he knows how to take care of things, and so then he's like, when I prayed to him, I realized that my rate of return of prayer was the same as when I prayed to God.
Yeah.
Half the time it was accepted, half the time it wasn't accepted. I'm totally paraphrasing and destroying his entire routine right now, but I think he made that point really well, and he was actually one of the first stand-up comedians who really openly talked about just openly slammed religion and
yeah. And that's a good point to actually bring back that. Why is it that praying to Allah or praying to Krishna or Buddha, like if it was the case that like Allah was a real God, would he answer dua if I said, oh Jesus? He wouldn't, because apparently it makes him very angry. Like if I worship Jesus, or if I pray to Aga Khan, he'll never ever let me in heaven forever and ever and ever and ever. So why is it that like we don't see that one particular religion is having a more effective rate of return, as you called it, on the duas and the prayers, and the rest are just like, nope, no response. We must be calling the wrong number. Let's try a different number.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
It's something to think about, and I think these little factual points, theists will try to say that we don't understand God's plan, and you can't measure God. You can't do a study on God, but there has to be some physical effect if you consider it to be a real thing, and you're not just talking to God just to like soothe your soul or something. Like, we should be able to see and measure the effects of these things in the real world. Muslim countries should have an above average success ratio in terms of whatever it is they're doing, whether it's playing baseball, basketball, or soccer, or science. Because they have God on their side, but we don't find that. What we find is like religion tends to be like parasitic, and it sucks the positive energy and the goodwill of a people, and it takes the useful time, and it's just wasted away on useless things like, should we wipe over the socks or not wipe over the socks? Does touching a woman break your wudu or not break your wudu? In the Hanafi madhab, it does. In the Shafi'i madhab or the other madhabs, it doesn't break your wudu. According to Salafis, men can wear platinum rings. According to Hanafis, men can only wear silver rings. Like, all of these like pointless things that like they don't seem to like. Why would God really care if a man wears a silver, like a gold ring or something? Like, why? What's the big deal? What was the point of coming up with such a rule? Is that in Shia Islam too?
Apparently, wearing gold is not a good thing. It's basically, you have to wear silver.
Only for men, right? But women can wear gold.
Women can wear gold, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's, these things are, I mean, this is one of the things that kind of made me very skeptical ahead of time, and it happened after I started watching the Carl Sagan Cosmos series.
Nice.
Thanks to a very lazy science teacher who just didn't want to put in the effort. So they're like, "Oh, I'll just put it in the." And I was in fifth. This is around the year 80s or something, and the mid 80s. And we were in fifth grade, and he just put on the Cosmos series. And Carl Sagan did not say anything about atheism. He didn't say anything about God or skepticism, whatever it was. But he just talked about the wonders of the universe and the awe that he had for the unseen and, everything else that was out there. And whenever I saw these things and I learned about time dilation and I learned about, quasars and I learned about all of the relativity, I just looked at this. I'm like, a God created all of this? Hundreds of billions of galaxies and hundreds of billions of stars just in our galaxy, like the sun, and we're so tiny and insignificant. I'm like, God created all this. Why does he care whether you're wearing a gold or silver ring?
Yeah.
Why does he care whether you're eating pork and not beef or beef and not pork? Like, what are these, these obsessions? They seem so human in comparison that it was almost obvious to me that, okay, these things they're obviously made up by people, because this whole don't eat pork and don't wear silver ring, these are things my uncles and aunties would say to me. I mean, it sounded like something that someone had made up.
But but what if it was just part of the test? What if God wants to know if you are going to be a good boy or a bad boy?
Again, hundreds of billions of galaxies, hundreds of billions of stars just in our own galaxy. Why is he so obsessed with testing us using stupid things like whether you're gonna, I created gold here, lots of it for you. I created silver, there it is now. But if you're a man, if you have a penis, you can't wear this. You can only wear that. Why would he care? This is a guy who actually, when the gravitational fields are stronger, then time moves slower. Time slows down, and time moves faster when it doesn't. If you go to the event horizon of a black hole, time almost stops. I mean, these are incredible, brilliant concepts that even the human mind can't comprehend. Why is this God testing us? If he wants to test us, why is he testing us on whether we wear gold and silver? And why is an afterlife of eternal torture and hellfire that is worse than anything we can imagine contingent on these, just petty, everyday, useless things?
Well, an eternal afterlife wouldn't be contingent upon these petty things. It would depend on whether you believe in the correct version of God, right? You could still be a sinner and still go to heaven eventually.
Eventually, I don't know. I think there's controversy around that. I know that there's I know in Christianity they have that, as long as you believe that Jesus is your savior, you're eventually going to get to heaven. But I think that if you are even a believing Muslim, but if you do terrible things and you violate the laws of Islam repeatedly, and that balance of 50-50 just tips in the other direction, I don't know if there's a purgatory
So I was taught that as a Muslim, because the Sunni Hadith say that things like whoever believes and says La ilaha illallah will go to paradise. So people were confused. They're like, well, people means Muslims. They would ask the sheikh or the scholar, and we had talks about this. How is it that you could just say La ilaha illallah and go to paradise? What about all of the good deeds you have to do, and the prayer and the fasting and blah, 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 and avoiding the munkar and the evil, and not doing zina and whatever, lowering the gaze. And so they said the reason, the way it works is you are a sinful Muslim, you will go to hell for a period of time, but eventually you'll be taken out of hell. And the kuffar, so what I was taught was a kuffar will go to hell forever. There's a minority opinion, which I don't see justification for. It's kind of, and most Muslims don't believe this, but there's a minority opinion that hell will be extinguished eventually, even for the kuffar, and it'll just stop existing. But the Quran seems to be very clear that it's forever and ever. Hell is forever. It's pretty clear on this, but somehow they did some subtle analysis on the words, and they said that it doesn't use the word abada when it talks about hell, even though if you read the context, it says forever.
But I mean, there are many places, let's say there's things that start with ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, all of you believers, and then it'll end, it'll talk about something you're not supposed to do. In the end, for them, there is a long everlasting doom. I mean, virtually every other verse in the Quran ends with, okay, for them there is this long everlasting fire. They will be residents of the fire. Their allies will be in Taghut. So it ends like so many verses in the Quran end like that, and it seems like every petty thing can eventually land you there. So, and we're not even talking about the Hadith right now.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
and a lot of this is directed to the believers. Like, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. I mean, these are. Whereas, the early Meccan surahs usually started with the Ayyuhan Nas, which means all mankind. It was for everybody. But a lot of the other ones are for believers. Like if you're believers, then don't, and you drink or you engage in games of chance. There's a doom.
Yeah, no. So that was not my understanding of Islam at all. So my understanding of Islam was Muslims will eventually all go to paradise. The only thing is there is a period in between where you will be punished and you will be washed of your sins by being tortured in hell. Like, don't ask me how that works, but you'll be tortured in hell for some period of time, whether it's 1 week or 1 year or 1,000 years. Once your balance is evened out, and then you can go to paradise. And so again, my understanding of the Quran was very heavily based on the Hadith as well, because that's how it was used to the Hadith was used to explain the Quran. But my understanding was the believers will all go to paradise, but you may go to hell, or you may not. So any sin that's between you and Allah can choose to forgive you. Of course, if you're a murderer, then all your sins are done. Like there's no sins for you whatsoever, whatever you did. But like if you committed a sin against another person, then there will be on the Day of Judgment like an evening out. Like for example, if I backbit you after I got off the show, I'm like, oh, I hate that Ali guy. He's so ugly. I don't know, whatever. Some insult about you.
He looks like Yasser Qadhi.
And then, so my good deeds will be taken away from me and given to you. So eventually, at some point, once I've paid off my bad deeds, then I'll go to paradise. Now, you can also just be forgiven altogether, because that's also one of the other things about Islamic justice is that believers, even if they committed sins, they could be forgiven if Allah chooses to forgive you. So it's not that, like, let's say, for example, whatever I did, I stole or whatever it was, I missed my prayers. It's not guaranteed I'll go to hell for that. I may or I may not. It depends on Allah. Now, if I was a disbeliever and I was the best disbeliever on earth, I was, let's say, Bill Gates. Not that he's the best disbeliever on earth, but I like him. And let's some people don't like Bill Gates, but let's
I like Bill Gates.
Let's say Mother Teresa. Now, some people don't like Mother Teresa, right? But I was
Yuval Noah Harari. I think we all like Yuval Noah Harari.
Like as an archetype, Mother Teresa, the saint archetype that spends her whole life, let's say, despite her religious thing that she did, and I'm sure she did some evil things in her life too, but let's say the archetype of Mother Teresa, she will go to hell forever, even if she spent her entire life doing good deeds. And somebody asked, Aisha actually asked Muhammad, there was a guy that was before you, and he used to all these, I think if I remember correctly, I hope I don't mix up the story, but there were all these girls that were, like abandoned by their parents because they didn't want girls, and they were going to be buried alive. And he said, no, I'll take them. So what will happen to him? He was a good guy. And Muhammad said in the Hadith, if it's true, but Muslims believe it's true, that he never asked Allah to forgive him. Whoa, like he never asked Allah to forgive him. So guess what? He's going to the hellfire. So this is like a really twisted morality, right? Like it's a get out of jail.
There's a lot of I know what you're saying. There's a lot of variability to it too. So when I grew up in Saudi Arabia, I used to hear all of this stuff. I heard so many different versions. Some people said that you're going to go through a purgatory-like place for temporarily, but if you are a true Muslim, you'll eventually go to heaven. Other people said no, it depends on your deeds, and it all depended. And everybody had something that they could pull out of the Hadith. Whatever you think, you can pull something out of the Hadith and even the Quran to justify your views. Right. Yeah. So I think that this is. It's like a universal thing. There's so much variability about this, like in terms of where you're going to go and how long you're going to stay in hellfire and all of that stuff. It's all over the place. I had even though we're talking about wiping away your sins, there's a way you could actually do it on earth as well. And this is also something I learned, that if you go on Hajj, once you go on Hajj, your entire slate is wiped clean.
Yeah.
You're done. Like you go on Hajj, you do all that, you throw some stones at those rocks, Satan, circle the Kaaba a few times and kiss the stone. And once you do that, for like 7 days, shave your head, you come home and you're like a baby. Yeah. All of it. And so I used to think when I was a kid, because I really like music. I used to play music. I could not live without music. I was addicted to it.
Astaghfirullah.
I know, and
Tawbah,
people
tawbah. Terrible
used
person.
to, yeah, I know, and then people used to tell me, they're like, don't you know Cat Stevens left music because it's haram, it's haram, it's haram, 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 you can't do that, and then it's and especially in Saudi Arabia.
But this is even a liberal Shia family?
No, in my family did not believe that.
Okay.
My family thought it was okay. But you know how you came from a Smiley family and then you were exposed to these Sunni things. And so I used to, and I should say my immediate family, my parents and nobody believed that. But a lot of my aunts and uncles, right, my cousins, they did believe that. And they'd pull out there's a Shia sort of text called Tufatul Awam, right? And it's a guidance for everybody. And it had all this stuff about people who do music. Music is like a huge, they used to call it Gunai Kabira in Urdu, which means like one of the great sins. And this disturbed me. So then I was like, fuck it, I'll just do Hajj every year. I can do whatever I want all year. I'll go to Hajj, do a clean slate, and I'll come back every year. I'm just going to go on Hajj and wipe my slate clean. And it'll be super easy. And I'll also get a lot of, thawab, like I'll get a lot of reward in heaven because I ended up doing so many Hajj. Every year I was going for Hajj, it's more than anybody else does. So, there are ways that you can wipe your slate clean aside from just after death. It's not just totally.
Absolutely. And it just shows like how much energy goes towards like reconciling these like invisible crimes that you commit. Like by offending God, now you have to like do all this stuff and spend all this money and do all these rituals. So Hajj can forgive all your sins. Ramadan can forgive all your sins if it's accepted. Even like one prayer, one sincere tawbah can wipe out all your sins too. Converting to Islam can wipe out all your sins too. So there's lots of things that theoretically can wipe out your sins if they're accepted. But of course, all Muslims believe that you never know whether Allah actually accepted. So you have to keep doing more and more and more and more, and it's never enough, right? It's one of those things. Apostate Prophet gave a donation. Thank you, Apostate Prophet. I hope you get unbanned from Twitter, although it seems very unlikely at this point.
Apostate Prophet got banned from Twitter?
Yeah, he was permanently banned. He shared a tweet from some Muslim girl that said, Islam is peace because you can't even kill spiders. So he responded in saying, well, you can kill homosexuals, you can kill apostates, you can kill adulterers. And there's a bunch of things he mentioned, which is true in Islamic law. All of these things are valid. Like you can not an individual can kill them, but they can be killed if they're caught or whatever, right? And so it had like 500 retweets. It went viral completely because it was kind of funny, actually, right? What she was saying, which is kind of like a layman kind of understanding of Islam.
It's true.
Yeah. And I've heard this too. You can't kill spiders because a spider. Do you know the story?
I know that we weren't supposed to kill spiders because of was it Surah Ankabut when the spider web protected
it's not
from being attacked.
It's not in the Quran actually, but it's like I don't even think it's in the Hadith or in the Sirah. I don't know where the story came from, but it's a popular story that's become part of the myth of Islam that there was a spider that put a web over the cave when he was hiding with Abu Bakr. So Allah said you can't. I've never read this Hadith ever, but it's a popular kind of myth, right? And so that's what he was saying. So he's banned from Twitter, unfortunately. I don't see any hope in sight, to be honest. It's kind of unfortunate, but
Surah Ankabut is actually called the spider. It's Surah. But you're right. It doesn't say anything in the Quran about not killing them and
or even what happened.
The incident. It doesn't say that. But go ahead.
And the Quran does say that the flimsiest of houses is the web of the spider. But now we know that the spider web is like 500 times more strong than steel at the same thickness, right? Which is pretty funny. It's like it's an amazing, like Allah's cursing his own spiders. Allah, what's wrong with you? You complaining about spider? You made spider.
You made them, yeah.
Why are you complaining about spiders? Spider's good. Spider web very good. Like Spider-Man, best superhero ever. Like how dare you? So Apostate Prophet actually had a question. What do you two think about the whole Petra Mecca thing? Do you think Muhammad was actually from Petra? Do you think he was actually from Saudi Arabia, Mecca, now what is now known as Saudi Arabia, or he didn't exist? What do you think?
Okay, so I think it's very unlikely that he didn't exist. I think that most serious scholars, whatever their inclination or predispositions, they all agree that he did exist. So I think it's pretty clear that he existed. I think that the Petra specifically, I don't know. I saw the Dan Gibson documentary and it was really, really compelling.
Yeah.
He found out all the stuff, but I don't think that the original Mecca is the one that we have today. I completely agree that it's somewhere in the Negev desert, right? In what now is southern Israel. It's somewhere around that. It's definitely around that Petra region. But I don't, because it just the way that the trade routes were. I think that that initial fighting, when they went back all the way 4,000 kilometers and then they came back in 40 days at that time, that to me is like one of the most compelling reasons why it's impossible. For that to happen, because the stories just don't compute. Like if you look at the details of it, also that the other thing you showed it in the AD 70, the year AD 70 in the Tabari biography. If you look at AD 70, it's not even one page. And that entire thing, there's so much that apparently happened that year that has just been. It seems like it's just been completely stripped.
Sorry, which year is this? AD 70?
I think it was AD 70. And if you look at the Tabari biography, this is between the Abbasids and the Mayas when they were fighting. So it seems like it doesn't exist. So this is something that Dan Gibson pointed out too. But there's been a lot of sort of academic scholarship in this area where people don't really think that the original Mecca is where it was. I find that very, very compelling. So I don't think that the current Mecca where it is where the original one was. I think it's somewhere in the Negev desert. Petra certainly does seem like it has all of the, it's got the cave of Hira, it's got the idols, it was a trade route, it has all those etchings in the rock. So I totally think it's possible. The way it was built perpendicular to the river, it was like a valley that was built perpendicular to the flow of a river. And all of that is just like with the Safa and Marwa and that argument that he gave. I think that's like he did some really brilliant work.
And he's a historian. I mean, that's what he does, right?
Yeah, he's a historian. That's what he does.
Yeah.
So I don't know completely, but I don't think that the current where Mecca is right now is where the original Mecca was.
So
what do you think?
So I like this. This work that he's done, and I have become the biggest fan, if you want to call it that, fanboy of academics now. Like when I was a Muslim, I didn't know any of this academics about Islam, and now, like even after I left Islam, it's been almost like I'm coming up to the 4th year in a couple of months. It's going to be 4 years since I left Islam, and it's only in the last few months, I would say, or last 6 months or so, that I've started to study academics on Islam, and I am amazed. I am so amazed that like this, the official like Sunni Orthodox, even Shia Orthodox like narrative is being picked apart piece by piece by piece, and like holes have been poked into it in such a way that it's hard to put it back. As Yasir Qadhi said, the scholars have built up Islam first over the 1,000 years, and then when you go into these in my video, the one of the videos I did about does Yasir Qadhi have doubts, he actually says you go into these Western academia and they're like taking it apart and they're like, okay, now you put it back together. And you're like, I don't know how to put it back together. Like I'm stuck, right? Like, what do I do, right? And that's why a lot of, as Noman Ali Khan said, you go and you study Islam in the West and you end up leaving Islam because you're like, whoa, what's going on here? This isn't what I was told. And, Sunni scholars and obviously Shia scholars, they don't teach you these things, right? So what Patricia Crone did and in Hagelism and what, the whole Petra thing. So I don't know, but I really like the fact that he's actually created reasonable doubt now. And he's
very reasonable doubt.
Yeah, like he's put a lot of question marks in the official narrative. And I love that. And I don't use the Petra thing because what my experience in dialoguing with Muslims is, by the way, I had a Muslim who spoke to me on the phone yesterday from Pakistan. We're going to do a live stream. He told me that this Petra thing was the one thing that caused the whole cascade of his Islam going away. After 46 years of being a Muslim, it was the Petra kind of research, then Dan Gibson's documentary that made him to reconsider,
Yeah.
like, am I believing in a lie or not? So this does actually work for some people. But what I found is when I'm dialoguing with Muslims, as soon as you throw in the Petra thing, they just say like, "Oh, come on, this is like a conspiracy theory now. Oh, you believe in conspiracy theory? Okay, and now why should I believe anything you say?" Or kind of like, "Well, why are you even quoting Hadith at me then if you believe he was in Petra?" Like, so I find that this is good for people that are academic minded and people that are, the epistemology is that I'm willing to look at evidence, archaeological evidence. I'm willing to look at, like academic research on Islam. But if all you believe in is like, I'm just gonna believe in the Hadith as it is, it's useless. Like it's not gonna get you anywhere with these Muslims.
Yeah,
Right? So,
I think that there is a way to set the stage for the conversation. So, for instance, like if I'm talking with, and this is something I've learned again for over a decade of doing this, is that if you, I'll give you one example. For instance, when Ayaan Hirsi Ali wrote that book, Why Islam Needs a Reformation Now, one of the things that she said in it was that we have to reject this notion of infallibility and inerrancy. Now, to do that, right, I think that in order to do that, you have to sometimes setting the stage for the conversation is much more important, right, than actually having the conversation itself. So I'll give you an example. When we were talking about, say, the Petra thing, before talking about Petra and bringing that in, if you bring in Petra, it does sound like a conspiracy theory. Oh, it wasn't actually Mecca. It was actually Petra, which is now in, Jordan. And, people from, the only way to go there is through Israel and, all this other stuff. That's like just a loaded time bomb for anybody. But if you start off by saying that, imagine that the first written biography of Napoleon was written this year in 2019. The first written account of what happened in his life was written now, 200 years after his death. Okay, that's exactly what the situation is with Muhammad. The very first biography of Muhammad that we know everything about, like there's the meditation in the cave of Hira, who all of his companions were, who his wives were, all of their names, about Ali, about Fatima, about all these things. The first record we have of it, written record, is from 200 years after his death. So when Ibn Ishaq wrote his first biography, that was over 100 years after his death, still a century later. That is lost to the ether. That's gone in history. But Ibn Hisham edited it, and he significantly edited it, and now that is the one that survives now. And everything else, the Tabari and all that stuff, they all come later. So 200 years after Muhammad was the first biography. What about the Hadith? When did the Bukhari edition come out? When were all those hadiths created? 215 years. It's around 250, over 200 years after Muhammad's death. Right. So these are the records. Before that, everything was oral tradition. Right.
Yeah, that's an amazing analogy. I've never heard of that. I never heard that before. That's wow. That's amazing.
And the reason I use Napoleon, I got to give credit to Sean Taseer, who's one of my good friends here, and he actually gave that analogy when I talked about 200 years. He's like, yeah, so that would be like writing the first biography of Napoleon today.
So was that on your secular jihadists with him that you guys did?
Yeah, we did. We did. I don't think he mentioned this on Secular Jihadists, but I was on his podcast. He started a new podcast, by the way.
Oh,
I'll plug it here. It's called the As It Lays podcast, and so I was on the first episode.
Oh, okay.
So so we actually discussed this then. So we talked about how many years it's been since.
And can you just tell people who Sean Taseer is? He's quite an interesting fellow, right?
Yeah. So Sean Taseer he's a good friend of mine. He is actually the son of Salman Taseer, and Salman Taseer was a governor in Punjab who was assassinated by his own, sort of Islamic fundamentalist bodyguard. Why was he assassinated? Because he went and he showed solidarity with Asia Bibi, and Asia Bibi is a Christian woman who was in prison and recently acquitted, thankfully, but she was in prison for almost a decade for supposedly blaspheming. So she was, because of the blasphemy laws, she was thrown in prison, accused of blasphemy. He went and he defended her as a governor of the largest province in Pakistan, and he showed solidarity with her. And then his own bodyguard, Mumtaz Qadri, killed him. And the guy who killed him is now a saint, considered a saint in a lot of Pakistan. There have been shrines that have been built to him because he killed Salman Taseer. So Sean is his son.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What a sad story.
Yeah. So we had a really interesting conversation about it, and I think that once you do start with that, once you talk about the history of how the stuff was compiled, oral tradition, how long it took for all of this stuff to come together, how the very first mention of Muhammad on any official state document, right, aside from the Yathrib Treaty, the treaty that the Muhammad did with the Jews in Medina and all the other people in Medina at the time. Aside from that, the only time his name appears on any official document is several decades after his death.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So this is close to around 690 AD, and he died in the 630s. So this is there's a lot, once you appreciate that there is a vacuum of documentation in the history, and a lot of this can be attributed to the rivalry between the Umayyad and the Abbasid caliphates at the time, who were fighting for power, and a lot of these documents were destroyed. These historical documents were destroyed, and you see that in Tabari, like the AD 70. Just look it up. Go find the Tabari biography, the biography of Muhammad. Look at the AD 70 chapter. There's literally nothing there. That was one of the peak years when this fight was happening between the Abbasids and the Umayyads, and once you set that up, then I think you can talk about Petra. And then people are more receptive to it because these things are undeniable.
Yeah.
So I find that a good way. It takes some time to sit down and actually go through all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just sort of spring Petra on a believer, remember, belief is not a rational thing.
Yeah.
House MD said this. He said, if we could reason with religious people, there would be no religious people. And that's it. So you can go there and you can talk about things, and they will think of everything as a conspiracy theory. They will not realizing that the Hadith and Islam itself could have been a massive conspiracy itself. There's no evidence. They will talk about. They're like, well, where is the proof for evolution? Give me the proof for evolution, without considering that there is no proof for angels and there is no proof for literally anything that they believe. So
the proof for angels is that once you believe the Quran's from God, then even if it said there's like spirits or whatever, you just accept it, right? So there's a leap of faith at that point once you've acknowledged the Quran is the word of God.
The leap of faith, there's another word for the leap of faith that is much more commonly recognized, and that is hearsay. The leap of faith. I've said this like lots of times. Like, I'm sitting on a couch right now. I don't have faith that this couch exists. Yeah, I know it exists. So there's a difference between knowledge and faith. Faith, by definition, means to believe something that there is no evidence for it, that you can't see, you can't touch, you can't hear, you can't use your five senses to sense it at all. So it's believing that. In other words, it's no different than believing in hearsay. It's the same thing as rumors, believing rumors.
And I've had people tell me, well, you believe in science, and that's a lot of hearsay too. Like, how do you really know, the earth is, 4 billion years old, and how do you really know that your father is really your father? Like how do you know your mom's really your mom? Like, that's hearsay too, right? That's testimony. You're going based on testimony. And if you don't believe that, this and this and this about Muhammad, well, how do you know this and this and this about Buddha? Or how do you know this and this about this so-called historical person?
No, we don't. Like, a lot of times we don't. When there's historical records about Buddha, for instance, right? There's a lot of stuff that we look at skeptically. There's a lot of stuff that we know is true, right? And the same goes for Muhammad. There's many things that we do know are true. Like, we do know that he existed. We know that the Quran very reliably is from around the time of his life, right?
Yeah.
And we also know the contents of the Quran. We know that the Quran does not mention anybody, any contemporaries in his life, except for two people, Abu Lahab, his uncle, and the second is Zayd bin Harith. That's his adopted son. Those are the only two It mentions all the previous prophets and historical figures and, Noah and Moses and everything.
Interesting.
But among the people that were with him among his life, there's no Abu Bakr in the Quran. There's no Ali in the Quran. There's no anything in except for Zayd bin Harith. And the reason Zayd bin Harith is mentioned is to tell people that your adopted kids aren't really your adopted kids. That's the only reason, because he wanted to marry his divorcee, right?
Yeah.
So, which he did ultimately.
Yeah.
So that's one, and then the second is Abu Lahab, who is basically an uncle he thought was going to go to hell, and that's it. So we don't have any, we don't know anything about Muhammad's life. All of the details are very, very scanty and very vague. The Quran is just, it kind of rambles on about all these other things, but it doesn't really talk a lot about history.
Yeah.
So the only documents that we know that we can place from that time, the time of his life, are one, the Quran, and the second thing is the Treaty of Yathrib. That's it, and that's all we have to go by, right?
Wow.
And the Treaty of Yathrib is actually used by a lot of apologists to show that he was willing to reach out to Jews and make contracts with them and coexist with them and all that stuff. So that's it actually has found a lot of utility for people in that sense. But aside from that, everything that we know, everything else was documented over a century, at least over a century after his birth, or most things over 2 centuries after his birth.
That's amazing. That like you're very clear, and you're saying these points with so much like mashallah, like wow, like so
but because they're true. There's no, you can say them with the most confidence you can, because every Muslim, no matter how strongly believing a Muslim it is, no matter how strong they are, they will tell you, when it comes to written documentation, so there's nothing else, they will tell you that there's an oral history. The Quran was orally transmitted. That has to be given some credence. And sure, and actually, this is so funny. I had this. What's interesting is that the way that the hadith started is that the people that they wanted, when they're looking for the isnads are the people who transmitted the hadith, like the progressive transgenerational game of telephone, where of broken telephone, where one person tells his son, then his son tells his son, and so on, and it goes on like that. So when they wanted to document these oral traditions, they went to converted Jews in Kufa. So those are the people who started compiling.
Oh, really?
The hadith, because the Jews had a tradition of the oral Torah, right? Like the Judaism was also, there's a strong oral tradition in Judaism. That sounds very. That's okay. I don't mean that's it's a double. It's an innuendo. But anyway, so there is a strong tradition of that, the oral transmission in Judaism as well, right? So these people had experience with it, and so many of them had converted to Islam. So they went to them. They're like, what you guys did back there in the development of the oral Torah and the Talmud and everything, can you do that with us, with the hadith? It's not exactly how the dialogue went, but I'm paraphrasing. So filling in the gaps. So these are people who actually started compiling them. And so it's no surprise that there are many sort of things from Judaism that are not in the Quran, like Rajam, stoning adulterers to death, or like circumcision, all of these, these are nowhere in the Quran, but they end up in the Hadith. A lot of Jewish traditions end up in the Hadith. But when you tell really devout Muslims this, then it does sow the seed of a Jewish conspiracy in their minds as well.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know about the ethics of using that to dissuade them from Islam, but
So the interesting thing is, when we go back to even like, let's say Bukhari, the Musnad of Imam Ahmed, like, we don't have any manuscripts. We don't have the manuscripts of Imam Bukhari. We have, like, Mufti Abu Layth has talked about this a bit, how there was we have students of Bukhari who transmitted to us Bukhari, who said there was like missing chapter titles, there was blank pages. They filled in the missing parts. So like what we're talking about is, like, even if you have this oral chain, this isnad, like, how do you really know that it's true? And we don't even have any manuscripts of these collections, right? So we don't even know for sure whether this was actually, like, what's in Bukhari was actually done by Bukhari, or whether students, incorrectly filled in the blanks. Whether when Bukhari, before every single hadith he used to collect, he used to, according to the legends, he used to make dua. He used to do wudu, and he used to do 2 rakats of, like, asking Allah to guide him, right? And so he did this before writing every single hadith, supposedly. And now the legends, there's a lot of problems with the legends themselves. Just the amount of things he memorized, is it even possible to memorize that many things? And whether these chains, like, he didn't know for sure whether this person said that this person. The way I see it, and I could be wrong about this, the hadith science is a science of like subtracting, not adding. So what you do is you have a bunch of statements. This person said that, this person said, this person said, and then you go and you try to say, okay, well, this person right here, he's not trustworthy. Okay, throw out that hadith. Next one. So you're taking a bunch of like questionable content and you're trying to filter it out piece by piece. It's not like you have a good source to begin with, and based on that, you're keeping it going forward. You have this big cloud of, like questionable content. Did Muhammad really say this? And then what you're doing is you're trying to remove all the ones which are questionable. And Jonathan Brown, again, I'm going to praise academia here. Jonathan Brown, who is a Sunni Muslim, has written an academic article which I've summarized on my Medium, which I call the widespread use of Sunni hadith, the widespread use of weak hadith in Sunni Islam. And Jonathan Brown has shown how the early scholars, for the first like 1,000 years, pretty much until Salafism, were like very eager to use weak hadith for everything except Islamic law. So when it came to Islamic law, whether you should make up a fast by feeding 2 people or 3 people, whether gold is actually haram for men, and all of this Islamic law, which funny thing is actually less and less and less important to Muslims nowadays. And what's more important is like, what's the word of reading the Quran? What's the description of paradise? What's going to happen when we die? All of these things are now more important, right?
Yeah.
Like what Muhammad did in his life. We Muslims want to know this more than they care about whether the fiqh of missing one fast, you have to feed 5 people or 10 people or whatever, because these things are changing anyways, right? But Jonathan Brown, as a Sunni Muslim, has acknowledged that all of the scholars were very, very like liberally using weak hadith, and so they were happy to use weak hadith because their worldview, they emphasized like encouraging Islamic worship over truth.
Yeah.
They believe, just like what you hear from kind of Jordan Peterson nowadays, that truth is, Darwinian truth. So truth is what is beneficial for humanity's survival. So from their perspective, they were going by the same Darwinian truth, meaning, I don't know if Muhammad really said it, but it's beneficial to Muslims practicing the religion and going to paradise. So
see, that's why Jordan Peterson has so many Muslim fans. Like no, I'm not kidding. Like he has a lot of young Muslim fans. Like he's been featured on TV shows and like when he said things about the the gender roles in the workplace, like even things like that. Like he's actually been very popular in the Muslim world.
He was I almost feel like he would have been good for the Muslim community. Like, I think that if he would have, there was a Reviving Islamic Spirit conference in Toronto, and he was one of the speakers. He was planned to be.
This was a long time ago?
A couple of years ago. Yeah, a couple of years ago. He was scheduled to speak at Reviving the Islamic Conference, but there was such a backlash from the Muslim community, because there's a one video online where someone asked him about Muhammad, and he said Muhammad was a warmonger.
Yeah.
And he was not like, because people were asking him, you take this archetype of Jesus being the perfect man, can we not do the same thing for Muhammad?
I think I saw that. I think I did see that.
And he made a political error in saying that, well, Muhammad is different. He's a warmonger. So he actually criticized Muhammad. Well, what the hell? He's not a Muslim. He's going to criticize Muhammad, right? What do you guys think? He's going to say, yeah, he was a bed of roses. He would love jihad. Like he was free, like he brought the whatever. Like it's silly, right, to think that people would think that. But But I honestly think, like, I'm starting to be, I'm more and more concerned day by day by the things he's saying, and they bother me because I'm seeing the fruits of his efforts. I'm seeing ex-Muslims go towards religion, go towards the right, go towards like the things like conservatism, and I'm disturbed by that. Like, I like some of the things he said, but I don't like where people are going because of him, and so it bothers me. But I think for the Muslim community, I think he would have been good. Honestly, I think that he would have been like.
He is sort of like you mentioned Yasser Qadhi, and you mentioned or maybe like a Zakir Naik, maybe not as forceful as Zakir Naik, but some of these guys who do tend to get young Muslims and get them to think about their their meaning in life, and religion is a part of it. There's much more to it, but religion is a huge part of it. So I have seen this a lot with a lot of sort of Muslim scholars that do it. So he does remind me a lot of that.
So Yasakari, I see, and Zakir Naik are both Salafis. So I see Jordan Peterson being more in connection with the Sufi Muslims and Muslims that are like, because he says things like, don't, like, what is God? God is the best thing that exists or whatever. Like, he has some.
Oh yeah, he's very vague, like the archetypes.
Yes. So I think that
which, by the way, is an argument that also applies to Mother Goose.
So I think if Muslims would take this approach, like, you would be able to get rid of a lot of the crap in like Orthodox Islam, right? So I think I do see it as a kind of progress in a sense, even though I don't like how I'm seeing ex-Muslims going back towards Christianity is the greatest thing ever. And I'm like, no, stop saying that. Christianity is terrible. I was very sad to see that one of my ex-Muslim friends actually pretty much what he said to me was bigotry. He's like, so somebody posted this thing that said that a lot of people are converting from Islam to Christianity, right? And he said that's better. He said, and I said, you're saying a Christian is better than a Muslim? Like what you're saying sounds like pure bigotry to me. Like, you're saying a Christian is in general, a Christian is better than a Muslim. How can you say that? How can you say a Christian is better than a Muslim? Like, that's bigotry. That's pure and simple bigotry. Like, you don't know, like, you cannot just say that, like, in general, every single Christian is better on average, or even on average, you can say that. Because, yes, Christianity, I can say, is reformed, and it's far, in general, Christians are, in general, not as dogmatic, and, they don't try to stone adulterers and stuff like that.
Thanks to the secular Enlightenment revolution. That's right.
Exactly. But it's like we're going backwards now because of the things he's saying, and they're trying to say, well, Christianity is a good thing. Well, no, it's not.
It's the same thing with the vaccines, right? So it's because people don't remember what measles and polio and smallpox look like. They tend to now think, oh, okay, vaccines, why are they? I think that enough time has gone by. People actually think that the reason that the U.S. is a secular democratic nation is because of Judeo-Christian values, when it actually isn't. The U.S. is the way it is because Europe, before the U.S. formation of the U.S., Europe was essentially full of Christian theocracies. It's called the Dark Ages for a reason. I mean, there's the Dark Ages, then the Enlightenment, right? So it was the Dark Ages at the time because what these in Christendom, what the Christian theocracies and governments were doing made ISIS look like kindergartners. Burning witches, beheading, burning homosexuals alive, like torturing Jews, but
that's not true Christianity.
Of course, it's not true. And neither is jihad is not true Islam, right? So in any case, they were doing all of this stuff because the Old Testament is the people say often the Old Testament is not supposed to be part of. They're not supposed to consider that part of Christianity. When you look in Matthew, Jesus himself apparently said that no, the Old Testament, I haven't come to replace anything. All of that stuff still stands. I'm just adding to it. And there's this idea that Christianity isn't violent. Well, Christianity. And that's actually true. Christianity does bring a lot of the hippie stuff into it, like to turn the other cheek and forgive your neighbor, and blah blah blah, love and forgiveness. But it uses the threat of eternal torture and hellfire to manipulate people into submission. Like, it's all love and forgiveness, and turn the other cheek. If only you accept me as your savior. If only you submit. But if you don't submit, it's the hell and torture forever. So Christianity is actually more like the. I was making this point recently, and I made it in the book too. Is there's a lot of Christians, evangelical Christians, who support Israel. No matter what. Right. Up to 44% of Americans, and this is from a very old poll. I don't know if hopefully that's less now. Is they think that Israel was given to the Jews by God. Now, the evangelical Christian belief, or actually the Christian belief, is that all Jews must return to Israel in order for Christ to come back. Okay, this is the crux of Western support for Israel in a lot of sense, and also the Arab animosity towards it. Like both sides, they all play on this. So they think that all of the Jews must return to Israel in order for Christ to come back, for the second coming to happen, and that is when salvation will happen. Everyone's going to go to heaven. So Christianity does have an apocalypse fetish, right, as well.
So go ahead.
So
Yeah.
yes, so they actually believe that. Now, what's going to happen when Jesus comes back? Jesus is going to come back. All the Jews are going to be back in Israel. He's going to ask the Jews to submit to him. What's going to happen to the Jews who don't submit to him? They're like, nah, you know, I'm going to stick with this Judaism thing. What happens to them? They all go to hell for eternity. So the Jews are actually being used as pawns by this sort of pro-Israel Christian faction.
Yeah.
They want the Jews, they want to use them as pawns to get Jesus to come back. And eventually those Jews, unless they become Christians, are going to be disposed of, right? So this belief, the Christian Zionism, as they call it, is both pro-Israel and anti-Semitic, simultaneously. So there is, I mean, Christianity is very, very evil in a lot of ways. It's even actually maybe even more. Christopher Hitchens actually said that. Christopher Hitchens said that the New Testament is even worse than the Old. He despised Christianity because it does everything that the other religions do, but it does it with a smile. It does it under the guise of forgiveness and love. It's, you know, there's a meme I saw that was great where Jesus is knocking on someone's door. He's like, "Hey, let me in." The other person's, "Oh, there you go. There you go. Knock, knock. Who's there?" "It's Jesus. Let me in." "Why?" "Oh, because I have to save you." "Save me from what?" "From what I'm going to do to you if you don't let me in."
Yeah, we're thinking about the same thing, eh?
That is creepy and it's sinister. So I think that like this idea and you know this is something that Jordan Peterson deep inside he knows, because he never talks about Christianity openly.
Yeah,
he always talks about this God as this vague thing that you can define any way you want.
Yeah.
And you know the Bible is full of archetypes and metaphorical this and that, which again applies to Mother Goose. It applies to you know, Lewis Carroll, applies to pretty much every other sort of really good fiction that there has been in history. So.
Yeah, it disturbs me how he. I liked him until I realized that, like, how much he praises the Bible, and that's when I realized that he's actually, I don't know, it's weird. Anyways, let's not get into that because he's a confusing bag altogether, and it's
he's confusing and he's confused too, I think.
Yeah, it's very hard to pin him down, so I won't get into that. But yeah, I think that it's somebody's asking, like, why is it like they don't understand what I was trying to say? Like, why is it bigotry to say, like, you know, a Christian is better than a Muslim?
Because do you want to answer that, or
can you? Yeah.
No, do you want me to answer? Do you want the questions for you?
Yeah, questions for me. So the answer I'm giving is that you can't just generalize like a Muslim versus a Christian, because you have good and bad people in every group. Like the majority of Muslims in the world are pretty like non-religious, let's say. There's different levels of religiosity, there's different levels of the understanding. Like even me as a practicing Salafi, or aka Wahhabi Muslim, I didn't wish harm on anybody. I wanted everybody to convert to Islam because I wanted them to go to paradise. I was very much a person that believed in obeying the law of the land. And you know, you don't steal from the kuffar, you don't rob. Like, you know, one of my sheikhs, Bilal Phillips, actually, someone asked him, like, why can't we cheat on the taxes? Right? And even Hamza Yusuf was asked a similar question, and Hamza Yusuf said, you are obliged, because when you signed a covenant, when you came here, right, or if you were born here, it's implicit that you are going to obey the laws of the land, like the traffic laws, the tax laws. None of this is against Islam. And even the things which are so-called against Islam, like, you know, there could be some debate, some room for debate whether you can have two wives under Islam in a country that's illegal. Many Muslim scholars would say it's allowed, because you can just take the second one as a girlfriend or something. But other than that, for the most part, like there's going to be some like controversy there. I can't imagine that someone could just say a Christian is better than a Muslim. Like, that's a ridiculous statement to make. Like, how do you know every single Christian? It's almost like saying, it's another way of saying every single Christian is better than every single Muslim without actually saying that. And to me, that's quite troubling, because you cannot just generalize like that over large groups of people, right? And there's going to be variation among the groups, even among Salafis. Like me, I didn't hate disbelievers. I wished good for them, and I wanted them to all go to paradise, just like I wanted to go to paradise, which is why I built my website, which is why I used to be involved in dawah, which is why I believe that Islamic law was actually good for the world, because I was naive. I wasn't thinking deeply about all of these things. I just accepted it, that Islamic law will solve all of the problems in the world today, like, adultery, and, kind of like simplistic, how some conservative Christians believe very simplistically that, their own Sharia law, like, you can never get divorced, which is a terrible thing in Christianity. You can never get divorced and stuff like that. They also think that's good for the world, right? But I also used to think the same thing too. So it is bigotry because you're generalizing about people, and it's not fair to make statements like, wide sweeping statements like that. You can ask a particular Muslim, what do you believe? Like, do you believe, so and so and so and so? And you can have a discussion with them, and you can see what the beliefs are. Because many Muslims, like, for example, a good example would be my friend Sharik Siddiqui. We had a live conversation, and your family too. You're very liberal, and even me, my family is very conservative, but we were good citizens. Like, I was a practicing Muslim in Canada, and I used to pray 5 times a day, but I used to do my job. My bosses loved me, and I kept moving up in the companies that I worked in because they loved me, even though they saw me with a big beard and I wouldn't shake hands with women, and I would go for Jummah on Friday and I would miss like 2 hours of work, but I would make it up. I would stay late. I would be involved with people, and they could see that I was a good person. Or I seemed like a good person to them, right? So how could you say a Muslim is worse than a Christian? Whereas there's Christians I know who are not like that. They were unethical in their behavior, not because of Christianity, not because they're not following the religion. That's just where they were. Like, some of them cheated, and there's Muslims that cheat too, right? So, like, it's a ridiculous thing to generalize like that, right? And
oh no, I was gonna. Sorry. I was gonna add something to that.
Please
but
do.
Finish.
I'm done.
You're on. Oh, you're done.
I'm done being annoyed.
So, first of all, I wanted to make a correction. Initially, I said Yasser Qadhi when I was comparing to Peterson. I actually meant Hamza Yusuf. That makes a lot more sense. I got them mixed up, which is actually really, really Islamophobic of me. All guys with beards looking like. Yeah, so that's actually who I meant. But anyway, I think one of the things that people, even I feel like everybody should know this because I feel like I've been saying it for years now, but and a lot of other people have too. But there's a difference between Islam and Muslims. There's a difference between Christianity and Christians. Okay, so I have a lot of Jewish friends who eat pork. That does not mean Judaism is okay with pork. So there's a difference between Judaism, the religion, and Jews. Islam is a religion. It's a set of ideas in a book. Muslims are living, breathing human beings, for many of whom now, 1400 years ago, it was different. A Muslim was someone who believed in Islam. Today, a Muslim is simply, often it's a birth identity almost. It's someone who's just born into a Muslim family. Right?
And that's the title of your book, Atheist Muslim, which
it's just
a show, oxymoron, right?
Yeah, it is an oxymoron to show how vacuous these labels are, right? So you can be, so the whole idea is that what does the word Muslim mean today? Muslim and Islam have very different definitions, right? There are many Muslims who out there who drink, who have premarital sex, who have girlfriends. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily Islamic. Okay, so when you say, for instance, that a Muslim is better than a Christian, you're kind of you're assuming things. You're assuming that every Muslim out there is completely adherent to everything in the Quran. Now, I'll give you an example. If you wanted someone, we talked about, say, let's talk about Muslim representation in Congress or a Muslim president of the US. Let's go all out, right? Now, who would you rather have as a president of the United States? A Muslim like Majid Nawaz, right? Who is more liberal than most liberal Christian people, or someone like Mike Pence, who once supported gay conversion therapy, right? Who does not have dinner with anybody except for his wife alone on his own, because and he won't drink, he won't do like all of that. So you have a guy like that who's a Christian fundamentalist, and then you have somebody like Majid Nawaz. I think that if that election came to be, right, a lot of people just value-wise would support Majid Nawaz. Obviously, is British. He's not. Yeah. This is a hypothetical example. So you can't say that any one Muslim, and take Majid as an example, or take Rahil Raza as an example, and you can do any one Christian, right? One is better than the other, because when it comes to individuals, there's an incredible amount of variation. Every Muslim has, sort of, they have different levels of piety and different levels of religious adherence to their scripture, right? So you can't say that. Now, can you talk about whether Islam is better than Christianity? Or Christianity is better than Islam? Yeah, I think you can have a discussion about it. can you come to a conclusion about it? You may be able to say that in this day and age, right, there are more people who are strictly adherent to Islam and follow its tenets. So Islam is more dangerous. 300 years ago, you would have said the opposite. You would have said, well, Islam is in the Ottoman Empire, and look at how everybody's coexisting, and, everybody's going well. The Mughal Empire in the subcontinent, everybody's coexisting, everybody's doing okay. So that might be a better system, but look at what Christianity is doing to Europe. And that comparison would have been the opposite of what we have today.
Yeah.
Right. But you can again, you'd be comparing Muslims, large Muslim populations to large Christian populations. Then you can compare them at the level of the scripture. Well, let's look at Christian scripture. Let's look at Islamic scripture. And all these other variables come in. Well, Islam talks a lot about jihad, and the New Testament's all full of peace. But the Old Testament is even worse than the Quran in a lot of ways. But then, is the Old Testament, is that really part of Christianity, or is it not part of Christianity? So these are discussions you can have.
Yeah.
You can say that when it comes to violence, one religion is worse than the other today in 2019.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the idea of faith and believing things without evidence and tuning people's minds to believe things on faith and think that faith is a virtue, when it comes to that toxicity, then both of the religions are equally dangerous. So there's many different planes you can talk about it, but I don't think you can say that an individual Muslim and an individual Christian is better or worse than the other. I think that either way, whatever way you go with that, it would be bigotry. So I agree with you.
Yeah, I think I know where he was coming from, and
me too.
He's a fan of Jordan Peterson, and he sees like these Christian values as good values now and stuff like that. Even though, like I said, like it's a Christian value that you can never divorce, ever.
Yeah.
How is that a good thing? That's extremely bad. Like that's horrible. Yes, Christianity also says monogamy, one husband, one wife, not one husband, four wives, which is interesting. But like, I don't see how not divorce is a good thing. That's actually a very bad thing. And I think you mentioned in your book, right? Like the founders of America, they were deists. They were not like they believed in some power or force, not necessarily the Bible. And one of them, he actually what did he do? He cut out parts of the Bible or something?
Thomas Jefferson. Okay,
yes.
So this is a fascinating story. So Thomas Jefferson, and look this up. This is absolutely real. He did not he was a big skeptic. He was a deist. He did not like the supernatural aspects of Christianity. He didn't like the idea of God or angels or intercession or any of that, resurrection, all of that, the sort of BS that exists in those myths. But he thought that the moral character of Jesus was a good thing. That's something that we can aspire to. So he actually cut out. He came up with his own version of the Bible called the Jefferson Bible, and in this he cut out all elements of the supernatural, everything about the resurrection, everything about all the historical, old prophets and Noah and the flood and everything. So he cut out all that stuff and just left so it's a fairly thin book, I guess. And when I say cut out, I mean that very, very literally. He actually took a razor blade. He went through the Bible and using a razor blade, cut out all of the supernatural elements in the Bible. So he spent quite a bit of time on this. Now, he also owned a copy of the Quran, right? And he owned a copy of the Quran from a very long time ago, before he had his sort of run-in with the Barbary pirates of Tripoli, which was the first military sort of confrontation that the U.S. had overseas. And so he had a copy of the Quran that was translated by George Sale. George Sale was not a fan of Islam. He translated the Quran because he did not see Muhammad or the Quran in a good light. So, and this is the Quran, by the way, that some congressman like Keith Ellison was sworn in on, because they somehow think that because it's Jefferson's Quran that he really loved it. But the things that he hated about the Bible, which was the angels and the supernatural and all that stuff, there's no reason to think that all of that would have survived his disdain in the Quran. In the Quran, the same things exist. So, and I think that if we had given him enough time, he may have come up with the Jefferson's Quran.
He probably didn't see the relevance, because it wasn't like he wasn't using it, or nobody was using it in his time as a basis of anything. So there's no point cutting it out. But the Bible was well referenced, and like a pillar of the society per se at that time, right?
So what happened was that somebody actually, they did use it. later as a reference, and that's
Oh,
something.
okay.
But this was after he got that. He had gotten the Quran much long before because he was just interested in these things, and he was a genius. I mean, Thomas Jefferson's like, just for his time, he was so ahead of his time. But what happened was that after the U.S. declared its independence from Britain, they used to send ships into the Mediterranean Sea for trading with Europe and with the countries in that region in the Mediterranean Sea. So the British usually would give them protection. But now the U.S. was independent of the British said, yeah, screw you, you're on your own, go do your thing. So they went in, and the northern African states, right, which were ruled by Muslims, tended to go out and, we heard about the slavery of, people taking slaves from Africa and taking them to the U.S. So this was the other way around. So the American ships would come in to the Mediterranean. These North African states would go out. The pirates would enslave. They'd capture all of these sort of Americans, bring them to Africa, and then enslave them, turn them into slaves. So Jefferson and the Americans, the new Americans, were really upset about this. They're like, what can we do? So they decided to meet Siri Abdurrahman Aja, who was the envoy to the Treaty of envoy to Tripoli, which is modern day Libya, and they met in London. And Jefferson went personally to meet him, and then this is in the diplomatic correspondence of the U.S., so this is everywhere. He wrote back. He said that, I met with the envoy, and he said that it is written in our Quran that everyone who dies in the way of Allah will go to heaven, and we are to make slaves of the infidels. And, all the same stuff that ISIS says,
Yeah.
same stuff that everybody today you can find in headlines everywhere.
Yeah.
But this was in 1786. It was before Zionism, before Israel, before Al-Qaeda, before Iran, before Khomeini, before all of that stuff, all of the causes that people talk about, U.S. foreign policy. This was before U.S. foreign policy even existed.
Yeah.
There was no U.S. at this time officially. So they went to war eventually. They went and they fought. And it was the first sort of military confrontation so the first confrontation that the U.S. had with any foreign power was with these jihadists in the Barbary states of North Africa. So he was not a fan of, I'm pretty sure that he did not like Islam any more than he liked Christianity, but the treaty that he made with the people in Tripoli, wait, it was a military confrontation. It wasn't an all-out war. So I want to correct that. But the treaty he made is called the Treaty of Tripoli, right? And this ended up in the U.S. Constitution. And that is the treaty that says the U.S. is not a Christian nation. So that became, thanks to these Islamic jihadists in North Africa, the U.S. became one of the foundational documents of U.S. United States secularism. Wow. So and he didn't he made that distinction between Islam and Muslims back then. Like he was not a fan of religion. He wasn't, but he believed that just like Christians, and he didn't like Christianity, but he liked Christians. It's like just like Christians, Muslims, and atheists, even atheists, he had, all of them should be able to be part of America. So, and a lot of this was a reaction to the Dark Ages in Europe. So Jefferson was one of the Enlightenment thinkers as well when he came around. So it's a very interesting history that I wish that more people would read and more people would understand, because I think that would would inform them with so much insight about the world that we're facing today. But
yeah, and I just want to remind everyone I'm speaking to Ali Rizvi, author of The Atheist Muslim. Quite a fascinating book. I actually bought it on Audible, so I'm listening to it on my commute to work. It's a great book, has interesting snippets and tidbits like the story you just gave. I love your the way you share like personal stories from your life, about your two nieces that died and how this affected you, how you met an Israeli for the first time. And that was quite the story. Now, I just want to say one more thing, last thing about this topic, which is like, I do understand where my friend is coming from when you look at Muslims as groups. There's some concern, and I do understand where it's coming from. Like when you look at Pakistan in general, like Muslims in Pakistan, they hold very regressive values in general, and there's very very homophobic values and very anti the democratic values, stuff like that. But I do think there's a lot of hope, that we can have a lot of hope. I mean, a whole topic was going to be about how, you know, ex-Muslims are rising, how people are leaving Islam en masse, even though it's not visible. I mean, me and you know so many people, but they're just not out of the closet yet. And slowly, one by one, they're coming out of the closet. Like a good friend, Reason on Faith, you know, any day now he's going to be coming out of the closet.
Oh God, I'm such a huge. I can't wait till he comes out.
Yeah, yeah.
I've seen. I think I can say this because he's anonymous right now, but I have seen parts of his coming out video, and it just looks phenomenal.
Absolutely.
So I can't wait till that hits.
There's so many people like him that are like still in the closet that are going to come out. So I think there's a lot of, we can have a lot of hope and optimism. Things are definitely progressing really well. I think on a global scale, there's always going to be pockets of extremism and stuff that's, you know, but I do think that humanity in general, we're in a very good, going in a very good direction. I hope it continues that way. I wanted to say one more thing about the wall, you know, how you said about Napoleon and how, you know, it's been 190 years after, like, as if we're talking about him now for the very first time. And it's interesting that the Bible has the same issues as well. Bart Erhman has a three-part series called Bart Erhman at the UCC. And I bought his book, How Jesus Became God. I think that's what it's called. And I watched his videos. And I have to say, like, he covers most of the points in his video. And he talks about how it almost like what we're talking about, like this conspiracy that happened with Islam, where people are not told the true story about Muhammad. A lot of the life details are lost or have been, you know, edited and stuff like that. The same problems exist in the Bible. Like, we're talking about like 70 years after 70 to 100 years, and then we have this progression of Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. And Bart Erhman in his book, he talks about the Christology of Jesus and how in Mark, you know, he becomes God when he dies, and then later on he becomes, you know, he's a virgin birth, right? He's born of the Virgin Mary, so he's God in the womb. And then, you know, by the time we get to John, the last gospel, he's like, in the beginning, there was God and there was Jesus, right? Like, it's like, it's so clear how the legends have evolved and how the four gospels evolved over time. And Bart Erhman does a fascinating job. One more thing, and on talking about the same issue, one more thing I wanted to say about this is that when someone asks you a question of like, well, how do you know about Buddha, or how do you know about whatever this person or whatever, my response would be, well, it doesn't matter, because my salvation is not dependent on whether Buddha existed or not, or whether he said wash your ankles or don't wash your ankles, or this is haram, or like, my life doesn't revolve around Buddha. And so it actually, or Plato or Aristotle or any of these great figures, like, I don't even care whether they existed in that specific time or a later time, whether every single thing that's attributed to them is actually attributed to them, because they're not claiming to be speaking to God. So whatever they say, we can take it with a grain of salt, we can consider it, but we don't have to really, like, we don't really care at the end of the day, because we can take it or we can leave it, right? You know what I'm saying? And just to kind of, you know, wrap this up, because I've taken a lot of your time, I missed this topic. I wanted to talk about in the beginning, but we can maybe end with this, which is, unless there's something else you want to add. I wanted to ask you, like, why do you do this? Like, you're a doctor by profession, like clearly you're a busy guy, right? You have a family, you have a son, I believe. And why is this important to you? Why do you take time out of your life to speak about Islam? Like, what, like, you've left Islam so many years ago. Like, why is this important to you, and why do you do this activism?
Why I do it? I do it because I feel like I have to. It's almost involuntary. When I grew up, so a lot of this the context comes from when I grew up. I grew up in Libya, in Saudi Arabia, and in Pakistan. So there was three countries that are sort of very different. You know, Libya's North African. Gaddafi was like a big fan of socialism. You had Saudi Arabia, which is a birthplace supposedly of Islam and Muhammad and the Quran, and then you had Pakistan, which is a South Asian country that was, you know, that where the Arabs brought Islam. So they all have, and then I kind of saw how Islam was practiced in all of these, and how intrusive it is, and how integrated it is in the cultures of these countries. How in some cases it has destroyed the cultures, the original cultures of these countries, and how it affects you personally, that how the ideology gets its tentacles into people's sense of identity and people's sense of family and community, and it gets in everywhere. So some of the examples I was giving you earlier about how it used to just intrude personally into my life. So I started talking about it. At that point, I didn't even. My only issue was that I felt like it was a lie. I started feeling like everybody was falling for it, and that is the only thing about it that bothered me. But then later on, I did become aware, and I started meeting people who came from much more conservative Islamic families, who were being disowned for thinking differently. And I remember asking my parents once, I'm like, dude, Muslim parents just love their children less than non-Muslim parents? Like, why? I was like, because they'll just disown their kids. Like if they leave their religion, if they start thinking differently. And so I started meeting more of these people, and I swore to myself that once I get into a place, when I'm living in a place where I can speak openly, then I will. Because I remember how frustrating it was not to be able to speak and how dangerous it was to speak. And I came to North America when I was 24. It's the first time I was part of a free society. And I started writing and all of that very shortly after I came here. And I started talking about it well before. So it was, for me, it's involuntary. I have very good friends. I've Raif Badawi is a friend of mine. He's in prison in
Saudi
Arabia, right? I know his wife and his kids, and I see them, and they've been separate. You mentioned that I actually have a daughter, not a son, but
sorry.
yeah, it doesn't matter. Gender is not important to me. So I had, so I see him and his kids. I see me, and he did the exact same thing I do, right? The only difference is I'm getting a book deal, and he is in jail, right? And that's something that disturbs me at a very personal level, because I see his kids, and I know his kids. And they haven't seen their father for like could come close to 7 years now, and when I see that, it disturbs me. I had another friend, Avijit Roy, in 2015, who was hacked to death with machetes in Bangladesh when he traveled there. He used to live in Atlanta, but he went there for a book fair, and he was just murdered in cold blood there. So a lot of these things are very, very close to home, and I've seen people who I'm close to, and I've seen them live the consequences of these things. So I just feel like it's almost a moral responsibility for those of us who don't have to deal with the kind of security issues that people back home do. In my case, and by back home I mean the countries I grew up in. I feel that it's almost incumbent on us to be able to speak out for them. And this was reinforced when I was writing my book, because when people found out I was writing my book, I got so many messages, and I got messages from like very prominent Pakistani journalists and celebrities who are closet atheists, and they wrote to me and they said, make sure you mention this in your book, make sure you mention that in your book, because they can't speak openly. So I almost felt like I had a responsibility to speak for those who can't speak, which is a very heavy responsibility, but I felt like it had to be done.
Yeah,
And I'm glad you're
absolutely.
doing it too.
Absolutely. I feel like everything you said rang true with me as well. And is there anything else you'd like to add? I mean, I just want to remind everyone one last time, check out Secular Jihadists. That's a podcast you're doing quite regularly with co-host Almin Nawabi. And of course, your book is fantastic. I love it. Hope to finish it soon. We've talked about a whole bunch of topics. Is there anything else you want to add before we close up?
I just want to remind people that this is the week. I think this week or last week marks the 30 years, I think, since the Salman Rushdie fatwa. When Salman Rushdie wrote the Satanic Verses, and the Ayatollah of Iran, Imam Khomeini at the time, sentenced him to death, and which the current Ayatollah just reaffirmed last week, and he got banned from Twitter, by the way.
That's what happened.
Khamenei has been banned from Twitter because he said that fatwa still stands because it's based on Quranic verses, and just like the Quranic verses, the fatwa it also is immortal. So so he reiterated it, which is obviously a direct threat of violence to Salman Rushdie's Twitter banned him as well. But it's been 30 years at the time when he wrote the book, and he had to go into hiding for 10 years. And 30 years later, Abdullah Samir and I are sitting here having this conversation. You know, he's talking about my book, which is available like everywhere. We have the Secular Jihadist podcast. You have groups like Ex-Muslims of North America, the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, Muslimish. All of these groups are holding annual conferences, biannual conferences, where people are showing up and speaking. There are movies out where, you know, sort of ex-Muslim type actors like Kumail Nanjiani are going out and talking very openly about their conflicts with the religion of their parents. It's just amazing. There's a huge, and most recently, starting in 2019, January 2019, Rahaf Al-Qunun is a young Saudi girl, open ex-Muslim, left Islam, left Saudi Arabia. She escaped to Thailand, and the ex-Muslim community is so big and so sort of they synchronized. They got together online, created a massive campaign to the extent that it has gained the attention of mainstream journalists and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, BBC. They all talked about it, and Justin Trudeau, who's considered to be a regressive leftist by many people, he actually ended up standing up for Saudi Arabia and taking Rahaf in, and they even did
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and Krista Friedland even did a photo opportunity with her at the airport, an ex-Muslim woman who had to leave Islam and had to leave Saudi Arabia. So 30 years after the Salman Rushdie fatwa, when it was virtually impossible, anytime you said something against Islam, people would say, don't do it. We're at this point now where we are openly acknowledging the existence of this phenomenon, which people thought was fringe. It has grown massively, right? And the dynamics are really good. There are lots of ex-Muslims and atheists and secularists, free thinkers in the Muslim world who are still under a lot of threat. It's still a terrible situation. Many of them still stay in the closet. But if we don't acknowledge the last 30 years of progress that we've made, then we can't give them any hope.
Yeah.
We have to, and the more people who come out, you know, the more people who see, and I know many of you are still in the closet, you haven't come out, but come out and show your faces. Abdullah's doing it, I'm doing it. Things have been okay. There are some inconveniences. That sucks. But if you are in a position where you can do it, you know, try to come out and do it. There's a big community waiting to receive you that is going to help you, that you can find that is going to show solidarity with you and support you. I mean, unlike when I started out like 10 years ago, it was very different. So I think that just having been doing this for 10 years and seeing how big it's grown, I am very, very optimistic, and I'm very happy about everything that we've been able to do. Every article, every post, everything that you do makes a difference, and it's huge.
Yeah, I love how you just summarized that. That's really great. And yeah, if whoever's in a situation where it's safe for them, especially if they're on their own and they're not under the parental care, or if they have a good enough relationship with their family to speak about these things without losing, you know, some, you know, like funding for university or like losing the place that they have to stay. Don't come out in a way that becomes like an explosive type of thing where a situation comes up and you just like let it all out. Don't do that. Be strategic about how you plan to come out. Like take some time, even if it takes a couple of years, make a proper plan of how you're going to do it. And same thing if it's like your wife and kids that don't know, you know, there's situations like that too. In that case, it's much better. You know, it's much easier because you're already a grown up and you're living on your own and all that stuff. But there's a different set of challenges there, because some women would, you know, leave their husbands, or some men would leave their wives if they left Islam. So there's definitely some challenges, but the more people that do it, like you said, the easier it'll become for everyone. And I looked up to people that were out before me, like Hassan Radwan, Imtiaz Shams. I just happened to find out about you as well, like I think after I left Islam. But like people like yourself that came out, like you're setting the stage, and I guess we are setting the stage for others to do it. So I'm very happy and glad that this is happening, and we'll see what happens. Let's hope that the Muslim countries become, you know, equally tolerant, and we start getting invited to like Muslim conferences as well. That would be amazing. I think there's a long way to go before we get there.
It's already starting, like you mentioned. Imtiaz Shams has taken part in some Muslim conferences, and I was actually very, when I titled the book The Atheist Muslim, a lot of people were giving me crap for it. But one of the unintended advantages of it was that I got called to speak on certain panels on HuffPost Live where they're like, oh, okay, we want to have a conversation about Muslims. So here we have a liberal Muslim, we have a conservative Muslim, and here we have the atheist Muslim. I was like, okay, that's an interesting to all of these things. So there's many different ways you can do it. And I actually think what you brought up, a guide to how to come out, is something that, I don't know, have you made a video about that? I think we should probably do
we should do something.
We should do a video about how to do it, some of the common stories that people have in terms of some of the obstacles that they've faced, and come up with sort of an FAQ list of concerns that people might have when coming out, and try to address those in a video one by one.
Yeah, Imtiaz has done something on it, but I think we should do a group. I think maybe EXMNA should do something, or CMB. We should do something kind of officially, like put it online, like step by step how to deal with this situation. Because I think right now we're kind of like it's very like one-to-one, like one person will ask another person, but there's no official document on how to do this. I do know that like the atheist Reddit they used to anyways, in big letters right at the top, saying don't come out to your family until you are independent, because they had so many stories of even Christians, never mind Muslims, even Christians were like having these bad experiences where they told their parents and they were like kicked out and stuff. So they were kind of giving general advice. And again, Muslims included, ex-Muslims, people don't realize that even some ex-Mormons, ex-Christians go through the similar type of journey, which is why I think a lot of your audience and my audience are actually ex-Mormons and ex-Christians, because they've also had similar kind of like trouble like leaving their religion or their communities. So we definitely need to.
That's right. Yeah. I've heard from a lot of sort of ex-Christians and ex-Mormons. Yeah, specifically those two groups. I've actually met them at my talks. Like afterwards, they've come up and they've said, and their stories are, in some cases, they're even worse than the ex-Muslim stories in terms of being abandoned by their parents and disowned and all of that.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is still a problem.
So okay, anyway. So everyone knows where to find Ali. Where do you normally hang out nowadays? Twitter, I guess, more than Facebook.
I'm kind of all over the place. If you want to connect with me, it's better to email me. Sometimes it takes some days to respond.
Okay.
So I got a lot of email, but it's my email is in my Twitter bio. My Twitter is my full name. It's Ali Amjad Rizvi. That's AliAmjadRizvi. And I'm also on Facebook. You can just kind of you can just Google search me and you'll find all the links.
Okay, perfect. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.